Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Extra amazing. Ryan, bro show. People live for the pound.
And not only the bro show, I was just realizing we're going to get to talk about Napoleon and World War II.
Wow.
What could be more bro show than that?
That is very, very bro show. That's right.
Little Roman Empire.
Can we talk about?
It covered.
God. See, I am not a Roman Empire guy. Sorry, everybody. I guess we could talk about Napoleon. Can we talk about the Napoleon movie and how awful it was? Maybe we can dunk on Ridley Scott.
We can.
That's when we'll make it a real bro show. All right, what are we covering today? This is the most difficult part of Crystal's job, and I always find it so trying. All right, good. I've got my rundown there in front of me. We're going to start off with J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, some major international fallout as a result of that. Europeans running scared. You've got Zelensky and others making declarations, some movements on the Ukraine peace talks. We're going to talk about Donald Trump and a Napoleonic-style tweet about he who saves the country cannot break a law. We're going to talk about Israel, Gaza, and Iran. Some guarantees from Bibi saying that he has been given the green light to attack Iran, and then Trump will back him up. Some other, however, indications about phase 2 of the ceasefire hostage deal. It's a complete mess. Ryan's going to break a lot of that down for us. We're going to talk about the Democrats. Jen Psaki absolutely stunned at Jon Stewart's declaration that the Democratic Party is not, in fact, democratic. And Luigi Mangione, he's resurfaced. He's got his first new public statement along with a website. Appears to answer a lot of fan questions. So even though he hasn't been in the news for a while, the Luigi fan club is alive and well. And then Ryan, you've got a segment called Woke or Based. Are you going to give us a preview of what it is? I've been ordered not to take a look at any of these elements. I have no idea what's going on.
We want Saagar going in fresh to our game show at the end here.
Okay.
That we're
It's
calling
woke and or based.
Woke or Based.
So I guess just for the people who aren't terminally online, I think they probably know what woke is at this point. Based is often what? It's a moniker that people in right-wing circles will use to say this is based, like
based is in like
this
is
based
good.
action.
This
yeah,
is cool.
exactly.
And it's like hardcore.
For example, we're gonna show people a video of a German diplomat crying. That's I would call based, in terms of being able to elicit that type of reaction from one of the most pathetic societies in the world. Ooh, oops! I forgot that Germany is one of our most viewed countries. Sorry, Germany. Anything before we get to that, Ryan? You want to plug anything?
I think you nailed that.
All right, thank you.
It's
a tough part of the job, man.
It is.
Usually I just sit here and drink my coffee. I'm off camera. It's nice.
When I do it, I go halfway through it and then I forget.
It's hard. Yeah. It's hard. All right. Okay. Let's get to Europe, as we said. J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference, returning. He originally went to the Munich Security Conference, I recall. I think it was back in 2022, where he was one of the only people to speak against U.S. assistance for Ukraine. This time around, however, returning as vice president, arguably one of the most important speeches given at the Munich Security Conference since 2007, when Vladimir Putin spoke there. Let's take a listen to the speech and we'll break it down.
In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. We gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States of America.
Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany, too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them.
So, Ryan, that has elicited a full-fledged freakout in Germany and at the Munich Security Conference. Our friend of the show, I can never pronounce his name properly. I really apologize. Arnaud Bertrand actually put out a very thoughtful, obviously Arnaud is very, I don't know if you would call him from the left. I'm not really even sure which way you would say that he is. He's somebody who I guess is very critical of the U.S. and European bipartisan establishment. Shall we put it that way? He actually put it really well. He said, it's really hard not to make a parallel between J.D. Vance's speech right now at the Munich Security Conference and Putin's 2007 speech at the very same podium. Both were watershed moments that fundamentally transformed the existing consensus. Putin at the time delivered the speech that marked the beginning of the end of the unipolar moment. J.D.'s speech will probably be remembered as the speech that marked the beginning of the end of the post-World War II Western Alliance. And so he goes on, it's quite lengthy. I highly recommend people go and read it. But basically in the speech, it was both a declaration of quote unquote universal Western values and a criticism of the European architecture for both taking advantage and free riding off of the US nuclear umbrella, actively using quote unquote anti-democratic censorship policies and others to suppress nationalist movements and of course literally overthrow a government. Your Romania reporting, by the way, has probably got to be one of the most influential things DropSite has ever done. I mean, considering how much it's been picked up by Elon, by now being cited here by name by the Vice President of the United States, it's genuinely remarkable because it does show us that there is both kind of a horseshoe element to a lot of this, but really at a very, very high level. This is not about Ukraine. It's much, much bigger than that. It gets to the point of that there is a fissure between the United States and between Europe, both economically but culturally. There's criticism here of kind of the European EU-led establishment. What they view as their most important single conflict, Ukraine, is frankly, more of a footnote to the United States. And then really what I think that they are grappling with is at the very same time that this Munich Security Conference speech and other happens, Secretary of State Marco Rubio today is in Saudi Arabia for brokered peace talks with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And that demonstrates what I think is a true return to great power conflict and to multipolarity. We are no longer, working within the fakery of the United Nations or the European Union or some OSCE guidelines. It is the two great powers involved in the conflict sitting down across the table and saying, what are we doing here? Because at its heart, that's what it's always been about, all the trussings of the European Union, the Munich Security Conference, and more. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what you make of all of this before we get to some of the German reaction.
It was interesting to me that J.D. Vance didn't kind of point out the Biden administration's role, because it's one thing, he wouldn't have to necessarily say, okay, and the U.S. is guilty on all of these things. Could have just blamed it on Biden if he wanted to, but he didn't do that. He suggested that these European censorship and big tech policies kind of came out of nowhere, and that the Romanian election that was overturned was driven by this former EU commissioner or other elements within Europe. And certainly there were those elements that were fine to see that that election annulled. The first major power to call into question the validity of the Romanian election was the United States.
Yes.
And the United States basically greenlit the annulling of the election by coming out and saying that. And as we reported in our story, it was USAID-funded entities that were involved in the concoction of this conspiracy claim that said Russia actually came in and used a fake TikTok
This is
operation.
basically Arnaud's point, where he's like, this obfuscates much of the United States.
So why would he do that? That's an
That's a good question. I honestly don't know, because I think you're totally right. That's one of the things that I actually most agreed with Arnaud's thread is, listen, I mean, I'm very critical of European migration policy and all of that, but he is correct where he's like, hey, look, you guys are the people who destroyed Afghanistan. He's like, you're the ones who
Syria for the most part.
It. I mean, I guess what I would say is it's not like there weren't a whole bunch of NATO troops there as well, and they weren't some of the biggest drivers of the permanent occupation of Afghanistan was built on much of these European European institutional liberal values, as in like, oh, we need to stay there so girls can go to school, or beyond any sort of national interest. That's largely what I think European policy has become. It's about genuflecting. It's about really. It's about even the censorship, the censorship regime on Romania, the Ukraine literal worship. Like so much of it comes down to defending like capital L liberal values across the continent. It's part of the reason why they hate their own nationalist movements so much, when, in my opinion, they're more responsible for their rise than anyone. Merkel's ideology leads to Brexit. It leads to the rise of the AfD in Germany. It leads to the National Front winning unbelievable margins in the French election. It's actually, the destruction of the French establishment. So when you think about all of that, the roots of it come down to migration. But I think a lot of the roots of it also come down to, the subservience to like this, to this non-national identity, which is the European Union. And so much of the current European population, and especially the European diplomatic and elite class, view themselves as Europeans first and not French and or German first, which is just not really compatible with, like putting your own citizens forward, which is why their own citizens are really revolting against a lot of these things.
It is, and the other point I agreed with Arnaud there, though, is that one of the shared European values that exists over the last hundreds of or thousands of years is war.
Yeah, true. That's true.
Like they love to do war.
They are warlike people. No, I'm joking.
They are a warlike people, and so for the Trump administration to be pushing a combination of we need more nationalism in Europe, and the European nations need to individually spend more money on their military budgets. It's like, have we completely forgotten what happened, in the 1930s and 1940s and the 1910s and the 1870s and the 1830s and the 1850s?
The alternative, right, to that is that the United States should be the ones that's the guarantor of all of their security, while they free ride off of that with their free healthcare,
or maybe
us, mass borders.
Maybe we, China, and Russia together, like just keep.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Babysit them.
That's
and
right.
At the same time, you've got China like sending its diplomats over to Europe, being like, you know what? We already told you that the U.S. is a nasty landlord. I think it was Singapore Prime Minister said, the U.S. has gone from like being this kind of hegemon to now this like low rent landlord coming around hitting us up for the rent.
Well, yeah, but that's they've also been delinquent on that rent for quite a long time. This is part of the difficulty, which is for all of our money and all of that, when the push comes to shove, what do? They're the ones who are major importers of Chinese cars, of Huawei, all their infrastructure. They openly buck any U.S. attempts to try and tell them to try and implement the same sort of export control. So in a lot of ways, they are the people who have created their own disaster. They've decided to they've basically tried to ensnare our country through worship of the transatlantic alliance. And I'm not kidding. It as is an actual worship. The one last thing that Biden's
over there, so
that Biden's dementia-addled brain was able to cling to was what? I expanded NATO. It literally,
got
like
Sweden into NATO.
When he's on his deathbed, he'll be saying AUKUS and NATO. Like that's what he views his legacy as. He'll probably forget his own grandchildren's name before he forgets NATO and the fact that he brought Finland into the alliance. So that just demonstrates what we're dealing with in terms of America's elite. Part of the reason why a lot of this stuff is getting amplified. So we've got that. We have the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who immediately criticized J.D. Vance. You had I think it was the Vice Chancellor who took the podium immediately after Vance, where he was like, I was going to give a prepared speech, but I have to just sit here and say how outrageous it is there. So, I mean, at a basic level, number one, they're not used to being talked to this way. But two is, like Arnaud said, they are dealing with a shakeup in the way that things usually go. Usually the way that this Ukraine peace talk stuff would go is like, oh, well, we would gather the G6, not the G7, right? We would gather the G6, sans Russia. We would all create prepared statements, and there would be the European Union would sign on, and NATO, et cetera. And then, as a, quote, united front, we would go and we would negotiate. Now, it would never work because the Europeans, the UK, and others are fanatically obsessed with defending Ukraine. And instead, Trump is like, no, I'm the guarantor of the NATO. I'm guarantor of NATO security. I'm guarantor of the EU's security. I'm going to go and hash this out with Putin, and you guys are going to swallow it and deal with it. And, I mean, to be honest, I think that is basically true in terms of how it will all shake out. Now, I'm not saying that they will go quietly, and Zelensky himself has now made some declarations in a new interview with Meet the Press. Let's take a listen to that.
That President Trump said this week. He did not say yes when he was asked if he sees Ukraine as an equal member in the peace process. He did say later that Ukraine would have a seat at the table. Have you been given any assurances that Ukraine will have an equal seat at the negotiating table?
So I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. Never. And our people, never. And our adults and children and everybody. It can't be so. This is the war in Ukraine against us, and it's our human losses. And we are thankful for all the support, unity between USA, in USA, around Ukraine support, bipartisan unity, bipartisan support. We're thankful for all of this, but there is no any leader in the world who can really make a deal with Putin without us, about us. The risk that Russia will occupy Europe is 100%.
If the United States pulls out of NATO,
Yes.
Russia will occupy Europe.
Yes, so not all the Europe. They will begin from those countries, as I said, who are big our friends, but small countries who've been in the USSR and the Soviet Union. They will begin, and we'll see what will be the answer. But Europe will not answer because they don't have. They will begin to defend itself. Each country defend itself, and at this moment, so Russia will get all the successes with all the territories they will want. I don't know. They will want 30% of Europe, 50. I don't know. Nobody knows.
So there we go from Zelensky in terms of his declaration. I mean, I don't know about this last part. If the U.S. pulls out of NATO, I don't see anybody saying the U.S. is going to pull out of NATO. Really, what he's upset about, Ryan, is that Trump said, no, you're not going to be in NATO,
Right.
which is the most obvious declaration. But what's really crazy is you're watching the European Union trying to figure all this out, and the Europeans. So let's put the next one, please, up on the screen. This is what I alluded to. Quote, left out of the Ukraine talks, Europe races to organize a response. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, said that the UK would provide peacekeeping troops inside of Ukraine if the United States were to not do so. Now, already the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has said, number one, no U.S. peacekeeping role will ever happen on the ground. Now, the fact that two, that NATO membership for Ukraine is basically off the table, and three, that the return to 2014 borders is unrealistic. I don't know. I literally don't know how anyone could argue against those three proposals. People are saying, oh, it's a concession that to say reality. I don't think that's a concession. I mean, a concession would be, honestly, a concession would be putting our own forces on the ground for a place that has absolutely zero national interest to the United States. But overall, you're watching this all get shaken up. So I'm curious for your reaction here.
Yeah, I mean, we threw all the weapons that we had stored outside the DC suburbs and shipped them over to Ukraine and threw them at Russia. Ukraine threw hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lives at the line there.
Possibly more. Nobody
Possibly even more. And these are where the lines are. So if somebody didn't want that to be the case, what is the option for them? Like it's not as if we have more weapons that we could really throw at them. Like the Ukraine was allowed to strike, Russia inside Russia with some of those long-range missiles. But even if we gave them every long-range missile we had and let them shoot them as far as they want into Russia, Russia has an industrial base and a population that is many times larger than Ukraine's. And that's simply the case. Like there was some hope that Russia's economy would completely collapse as a result of sanctions and the war economy. The economy is struggling in Russia for sure, but it did not collapse. And so the reality is that Ukraine is not playing with much of a deck at this point. And Ukraine also knew that if Trump won this election, they were screwed.
Oh, absolutely.
That was
they even kind of said that.
They said that.
Yeah.
They said that out loud because they knew it. We knew it. Everybody knew it. Now it's happened, and now they're screwed. And then you have to ask, then what was all of this for?
Right.
What did so many people sacrifice their lives for?
Well, you know what it was for, because unfortunately, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other kind of said it all out loud. It's about killing as many Russians as possible. I guess we just forgot.
It's just psychotic because it was about weakening Russia, but it's like Russia's not necessarily weaker.
No,
Might be stronger.
I'm honestly, I predicted
even on
that
its
it would
own
be much more
psychotic
difficult for
terms,
them to get where they are. I'm stunned by how quickly they were able to bounce back. And by bounce back, I mean, they ate like a 20% haircut or something on their initial GDP, but after that, they've just turned their country into a war economy. They've sanctioned proof to all their financial institutions 10 times more than ever before. The Chinese have stepped in to supply all their consumer electronics. North Korea's got plenty of ammo. They're willing to send their own troops to fight and die for Russia. This is the best thing that's ever happened to North Korea.
Do we believe that yet?
I'm not. Well, that's a good point. You're right. I probably shouldn't fall victim to some of these
it might
psyops.
be true. I don't know.
I'm pretty active on Telegram in terms of these channels, viewing videos. I've not yet seen any videos of actual North Koreans dying who are on the front line. If you see any, I guess send it to me.
They keep showing us Russians that look Korean. It's like, bro, half of
that's
Russia
true. There are
looks
a
like
lot of Russian citizens who who have heritage
Asiatic.
from quite literally Asiatic, like from the steppe or from Kyrgyzstan or whatever. Any of these places that are still inside of the current Russian Federation. So great point on that one, Ryan. So the Ukraine last ditch appears to be selling like mineral rights, and this is something that Lindsey Graham has been pushing hard for many years. He certainly has found a way to Trump's heart, talking about how many awesome rare earth minerals they have and why that's the reason that we should support Ukraine. Let's take a listen.
I think the main thing for me is that Ukraine has value. Literally has value.
Right.
So you can talk about democracy, and people love talking about democracy here, which is it's great to talk about democracy, but where were you in 2014 when they actually needed you? So Trump now sees Ukraine differently.
Because the rare earth stuff.
Oh, my God. I said, playing golf, these people are sitting on literally a gold mine.
What did he say?
What do you mean? I showed him a map.
Yeah.
Look, everybody says Putin wants to reconstruct the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire.
You showed him a map of the rare earth on the golf course?
Oh, not on the golf course.
But later.
Later, yeah. He's seen this. Look, this stuff that's one of the reasons the guys wanting to go into Ukraine is take their stuff. I mean, there's trillions of dollars of very valuable rare earth minerals that he's trying to take by force. And I told President Trump, that's not a good way to do business.
So you made Donald Trump a Ukraine hawk by showing him that map, huh?
Well, I don't know if he's a Ukraine hawk, but I made him understand that if you let Putin get away with this, grabbing stuff at not his by force, other people will start doing it.
So I guess that's all they have now in terms of what it looks like. There's some reporting here. Let's put this up there on the screen from Josh Rogan. He's very tapped in to the foreign policy elite. He says multiple lawmakers here in Munich told me that the U.S. congressional delegation presented Zelensky with a piece of paper they wanted him to sign, which would grant the U.S. rights to 50% of Ukraine's future mineral reserves. Zelensky, quote, politely declined to sign it. He continued, after a lot more reporting, I have more detail. This plan was presented to Zelensky by the U.S. ambassador in advance of the Secretary Bessent's trip to Kiev. Zelensky told the lawmakers about it today. In today's meeting, Zelensky was telling them about the paper, which many of them didn't even know about, not the other way around. He said he couldn't sign it because it didn't contain any security guarantees for Ukraine. So that's the current status of this.
So Josh had it a little bit backwards the first time around, but still a nice little scoop. But basically, what happened, so Secretary of the Treasury comes to Ukraine, and ahead of his trip, the U.S. ambassador presents Zelensky with this deal. Like, we will take 50% of your rare earths, and there's not even a quo on it. There's not even a promise that, and as a result, you will get these security guarantees. It's just like, by the way, we're going to take 50% of what you have. Zelensky declines to sign that, and then kind of tattles to the lawmakers who come a couple days later. One question I'm starting to have, though, is how rare these rare earths are.
Yes,
everywhere in the world.
That is such a good point.
They're everywhere.
I hear about it all. Yeah, you're right. The Congo, Afghanistan.
Venezuela,
Remember, people said
Bolivia,
Afghanistan was going to have $1 trillion I think Mexico does have a large lithium deposit.
They do.
Chile,
but
right?
is that rare?
Good point. I guess it's not. I hadn't thought about that. So we should get into Trump's ear and be like, they're not that rare.
They're
Mr.
just
President.
Earths.
They're actually in
Yeah.
Wyoming. They're sitting right here. We could go tap it right now. They're even in Canada. You know, we don't even have to annex Canada. We could just buy it from them. You don't need to send
$200
a bunch
billion we're
of people to
sending them.
die for all of this. So I will say, I think that remains the biggest obstacle to any sort of future Ukraine peace deal is this, convincing Donald Trump that in 50 years from now we'll be able to have access to all of these mineral rights or whatever. Apparently this is an active thing that Zelensky and them are pushing. But at a big level, again, just to prepare everyone, the Munich speech is paired with the Saudi Arabia peace talks, which are ongoing right now in Riyadh. We will, stay tuned for what that looks like, but it is the first real bilateral talks between the United States and Russia in years since the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict. Trump literally said he spoke to Putin. They mutually agreed to visit each other's countries, and we'll continue to keep everybody updated. But speaking of that, this is definitely something very close to Ryan and I's heart. It was an off-the-cuff remark by Donald Trump where neither of us really believe it's true, but we would like for this to be true. Let's take a listen.
We have the greatest military equipment in the world. We're building it. At some point, when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China, and I'm going to meet with Russia in particular, those two, and I'm going to say, there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on military. There's no reason for you to be spending $400 billion. China's going to be at $400 billion. We're at $1 trillion. We're going to be at close to $1 trillion. And I'm going to say, we can spend this on other things. We don't have to spend this on military and I'm going to be meeting with China. We were trying to de-escalate nuclear, and I was in a position where Russia had agreed and China had agreed we were going to start, and then we had a rigged election, so that never took place. But this one was too big to rig. We won by so much that it was too big to rig.
That President Putin really liked the idea of cutting way back on nuclear, and I think the rest of the world, we would have gotten them to follow, and China would have come along too. China also liked it. Tremendous amounts of money are being spent on nuclear, and the destructive capability is something that we don't even want to talk about today because you don't want to hear it. It's too depressing. So we want to see if we can denuclearize, and I think that's very possible.
So, Ryan, is this the most radical proposal since what? Since Richard Nixon or prior to that? I'm trying to think. Maybe the Kennedy administration, the START treaties, the nuclear treaties. This is definitely in that vein. Now, obviously, there's not a single. Is there maybe one lawmaker in Washington, maybe 2 or 3, who might have go along with this? But
like a Bernie.
All 532 other members definitely going to be against this. So again,
Bernie, as long as you don't go after whatever they're making in Vermont.
That's right. As long as you're not touching whatever is made in Vermont, he says. Well, we don't have to spend this on other things. We can lower our defense spending all around, and then we won't have to spend it on the military. It's a nice idea. It's certainly a nice idea.
You have to go back to JFK's American University peace speech.
Oh, the one that got him killed.
The one that probably got him killed.
Right.
And also people should go back and check out the conspiracy analysis around that where he may have been influenced by LSD toward the end of his life.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah, from Mary Pinchot Meyer, who he was having an affair with, who was
she, secretary?
Cord Meyer's ex-wife.
Okay.
Cord Meyer, one of the kind of top original goons in the CIA. She was also very close friends with Timothy Leary.
Oh,
and she definitely dosed David Bradley and a bunch of other luminaries in the 1960s and
fascinating.
And so there's some
blowing my mind right now.
No question she smoked weed with JFK.
All right. Well, it's the old weed.
There is some question.
We'll make an exception.
Did they trip?
Okay.
It's possible.
Yeah.
She was then murdered on the towpath. So go have fun down there.
I'm unfamiliar with all of this.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah,
this is a good one.
I need to talk to Oliver about it. We got to give him a call.
So Trump is creeping into dangerous territory here.
You're right. This is very
but
dangerous territory.
he's obviously correct. If you can sit down with China and Russia and be like, look, we're dropping $1 trillion, you're dropping $400 billion. Russia, you're dropping an insane percentage of your GDP on military spending and nuclear spending. You can't afford that. We're getting bankrupted. China, don't you want to do more Belt and Road stuff instead of nuclear weapons? And if they can come to an actual agreement on that, that's Nobel Peace Prize worthy.
That's again why I'm so supportive of ditching all of these fake institutions, which I think either propagate conflict or do everything to truss up great power competition in the language of international values. We were talking a lot about this last time with Crystal about the idea of propping up and sending 1 million or so Ukrainians to their death or to being maimed for democracy. And it's like, no, this is obviously not about democracy. It's about realpolitik. A bad reading, in my opinion, about trying to get all these Russians killed. But it especially falls apart with realpolitik policy in Israel. So you're like, oh, well, actually, we're okay with it over here, but we're definitely not okay with it over here. It's ridiculous, right? And it falls apart on its own face to any neutral observer out there. Her point was, well, maybe it was a good thing to at least still trust it up with democracy. But this gets to my point that there is no true balance of power in the language of human rights, democracy, institutions. Great powers are the people who run the world. It has just been through these institutions that have been their vehicle. At its heart, the future of the world will be, basically decided by the nuclear powers, and especially by the United States and China, to a lesser extent Russia here, with respect to Europeans. So just sit down with them and be like, okay, what are we doing here? This is something that we did so much in the past. I mean, one of the things I respect so much about our leaders like Eisenhower and Truman and FDR is, outside of FDR's case, Truman and Eisenhower were deeply skeptical of Khrushchev or of Stalin. They still met with them all the time because they even, mutually distrusted each other at those alliance tables, but they had obviously a common enemy under Nazi Germany, but even beyond that, trying to figure out what can we do about, making sure that there is not such another devastating war. And I think, if anything, the removal of consequence of war, what you were talking about earlier with Europe, has turned all of this into like an intellectual exercise that belies how important it is to actually have true balance of power, to have honesty in international relations, where hypocrisy, in my opinion, just breeds too many gaps for people like Russia and others to view what is U.S. national policy with respect to Ukraine. When we don't speak in the language of national interest, we both cannot understand one another, but it leads to so much ambiguity, hypocrisy, and others, that it leads to things like Iraq, Libya, the North Koreans being unable to trust us for giving up their imagine if we had never taken down the Libyan regime and destroyed Gaddafi. I think there's not a big chance, but there's somewhat of a chance that the North Koreans would listen. But that's what they always say. They're like, I'm not listening to you. I will never trust you. Look at Gaddafi. I don't blame them. If I were them, there's no way I would give it up either.
Right. He gave up nuclear weapons and quickly thereafter he's dead. The only place where I'd slightly disagree with you there is that I would draw some daylight between the approaches of FDR and Truman. Whereas FDR, I think, if he had lived, was willing to, and in the whole, if he had lived, you can kind of fill in your own utopia, but there's a lot of evidence, I think, that FDR had decided that in a post-World War II era, it was time to share the world with communism and with the Soviet Union.
That's definitely true.
It was not going to be it wasn't going to be a Cold War that was a zero-sum contest of, we must defeat them or they will defeat us. That he believed that there was enough of a world order that could be, that the pressure of communism was going to blunt the ills of capitalism and create enough of a social welfare state that it would be more stable in a Keynesian kind of way, whereas Truman and the kind of national security apparatus that was behind him really saw it as a zero sum. So in some ways, we now have another opportunity to make that bargain with another version of communism, but now it's instead of FDR, it's Trump, and instead of Stalin, it's Xi. And let's share the world.
Yeah. Well, Xi is a lot smarter than Stalin, so I'd rather talk to him.
Let's share it instead of fighting over it. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum competition.
Right. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but at the very least, zero-sum competition can actually still have a more stable outcome than whatever the hell is currently happening with Ukraine. It's not in NATO, but we're going to treat it like NATO. We're going to send a lot of troops there, and it's a vital of interest in NATO. Except NATO countries are supposed to be a vital interest. It doesn't make any sense. All of it falls apart in itself. You got to defend Ukraine so that we can defend NATO. It's like, well, the whole purpose is to defend NATO. So, and then before that, NATO knocked off Muammar Gaddafi. So what? Libya was a vital interest to NATO. That still remains one of the most insane things that ever happened. Let us, however, say that the resistance right now to reducing military spending is titanic in terms of what you're up against in Washington. We have an example here from Dan Crenshaw, some people have called him. I don't know why they would. Here on Face the Nation, let's take a listen.
When it comes to the military and military spending, the U.S. spends about 3.4% of its GDP on defense. Are you on board with boosting it to 5%, which is what President Trump is saying Western countries need to do? Are Republicans going to do that?
It's quite the target. Look, we've got a lot of work to do right now. We've got a budget passed from the last year's budget. Government funding expires on March 14th, so we got to deal with that. We got to deal with the debt ceiling. We've got to finance disaster aid for California wildfires. We've got a reconciliation bill coming up. Look, you look at the world at the moment and where America stands and the investments we need to make. It's pretty obvious we need to increase defense spending, and the exact amount, of course, will get worked out in Congress.
So there you go.
And yes, and Pentagon spending is the only thing that the media will ever talk about in its proper terms, which. To me, the proper way of talking about spending is as a percentage of GDP.
Obviously. Because
that's how you can understand something. You know, what do you spend in rent as a percentage of what you make? Like, that's what matters.
That's right.
And so 3.4%, all of a sudden now it's, oh, that's kind of tiny. We could do a little bit more than that. They never will talk about, like, the actual foreign aid to, like, Africa as a percentage of GDP. That isn't the, like, regime change
Well,
stuff.
you're going to hear it from me at least, right? I'll tell. Well, that's part of why I get annoyed. Everyone's like, "This is an American revolution." I'm like, guys, it's 0.7% of the federal budget, okay? Like, and actually,
and that includes all the
whatever
regime
this
change
Africa
stuff. Take that out.
I was going to say.
Like,
so if you take out the woke bullshit, it's like maybe 0.25% of the federal budget. If you want a real American revolution, you got to go for the Pentagon or you got to go for the entitlement programs. I don't think we should go for the entitlement programs. So what do we have left? Right?
Pentagon it is.
Let's talk, right? Yeah. If anybody ever wants to talk about that, my door is open. My phone line is ready. However, conveniently, there's just way too much. I mean, as you and I know right now, of all the talk for firing federal workers, et cetera, there has not been even a modest dent in what the economy of Washington really is. If Doge, all those other people, actually go after the Pentagon, that's when you're going to see a real fall in housing values and a destruction of the Northern Virginia economy. Until that time, we're not talking about a substantial amount of people.
The closest we got was, we reported last week that Elon Musk had a $400 million contract for these armored Teslas.
We had it here on the show. Yeah.
And then, whoop, they nixed that contract. So
did they nix it? I thought they only changed the name of it.
First, they changed the name, and then a day or two later, they said, actually, this whole thing's on hold.
Really?
Which, and frankly, from a green, let's talk about clean energy real quick. From a green perspective, this was stupid anyway, because if you are driving around in an armored diplomatic vehicle, then by definition, you're in a difficult country, it's a developing country.
Right. Yeah, so where are you going to charge your car?
You're going to charge it at the embassy, which is fired by a coal-powered plant. Like any country, if you're in Norway, you don't need an armored Tesla.
Yeah, good point.
You can get around in an Uber. Right. And there you can maybe find some renewable energy. But in Congo, where you do need armored vehicles to get around, those are coal plants that are firing your electric vehicle. So you've got the carbon footprint of making the thing. Then you've got the carbon and of getting the rare earths.
It's starting to sound like me on electric vehicles.
Then you got the carbon footprint of shipping it over to Congo.
That's right.
And then you're plugging it into a coal-fired power plant.
Well, it's extra stupid because you take the cobalt out of the Congo, you ship it to China or the United States, you refine it, you put it in the country, and you ship it back to the Congo.
And then you plug it into a coal-fired power plant.
Plug it into a coal-fired power plant. Yeah,
so they've paused that contract.
Okay, good. Yeah,
you're welcome. That's $400 million for you.
Right, but now what are they going to buy? They should just buy a Land Cruiser. That's what we all know. Look, you know,
buy the old.
What's that truck that all the terrorists use? Hilux.
Toyota. Get the Toyota.
That thing is sick. Let's be honest. You know, we have got a lot of proof in a lot of these videos.
I want to
buy one if I could.
I want to see the diplomats riding in the back of the white Toyota.
In the back of a Toyota Hilux. It's indestructible. When I lived in the Middle East, all the Arabs were rolling around in Toyota Land Cruisers. You got to learn from them. All right, let's go to Donald Trump and his Napoleonic declaration, in addition to some updates around Doge. So Donald Trump shocked America. I guess maybe not so shocking. Let's put this up there on the screen. He who saves his country does not violate any law. So Ryan, who and what came up with this saying? What is the historical echo here?
Yeah, so this is an apocryphal Napoleon quote that comes from the the good Napoleon movie, Waterloo, which was like that 1970s.
I've never seen it. Maybe I should watch it.
It's on YouTube. Yeah,
Okay,
it's cool.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, and they famously they have like 150,000 like extras, like actually do the battle.
Wow.
So I don't know if it was 150,000, but
Yeah.
tens of thousands of people dressed as Prussians and French soldiers. It was the most sophisticated and like gigantic battle scene like ever filmed by Hollywood. And so not the CGI like whip up that Ridley Scott
did.
Made us suffer through. But yeah, so whether Napoleon said this or not, this is how Napoleon felt.
Yeah.
Like
it's been attributed to him.
He definitely did say, "I am the revolution."
Right.
Wait.
I am the state.
Yeah.
Didn't he say that?
Well,
That's the famous line.
that was the king who got.
Oh, sorry, that was
cut
the king.
off.
That was
Yeah.
the king. That's right.
But what Napoleon said is his version of that exact same thing was, "I am the revolution," because he was saying like, people are saying like, "Hey, I thought the revolution was for all of these, fraternity, equality. Like we just talk about all this stuff?" And he's like, "Well, no, I am the revolution.
Okay.
So whatever I do is therefore an advancement of the revolutionary values, the French revolutionary values." And Trump saying this is really only a kind of stating a textualizing of what has always been his subtext, that there isn't really ideology behind Trumpism. It's whatever Trump says.
Correct.
Now he's taking it to the place that it's not even illegal if I do it, which ended Nixon as
when the president does
like,
it, it's not illegal.
Yeah, that was considered
yeah.
to be the worst thing that a president had ever said. Basically.
Did he say that? I don't think he said that in office, though. I think he said
no,
that
he said in the
Frost David
interview.
Frost interview.
But it was
right.
like he was trying to make his comeback, and when he said that, like, banish this man
the
to
president
Elba.
does it, it's not illegal.
Yeah.
Let's put the next screenshot up there from Elon. Yeah, lots of American flags there. I guess Elon is a consul, a deputy of one of Napoleon's generals here.
He's the Talleyrand.
Yeah, that's right. Although does it fit?
Well, yes, because Talleyrand screwed him in the end.
That's true, but he was
Which
also
Musk will do.
Talleyrand was he was like a how would you say? He's like
opportunistic.
He was an opportunist. He was constantly playing people off of each other. He was a vassal to the king, and then to the revolutionaries, and then eventually to Napoleon. He features very prominently in the popular book, I'm forgetting, 48 Laws of Power. There are a ton of Talleyrand quotes.
And then and then Talleyrand sells Napoleon out. So
that's true.
Careful,
Yeah.
careful.
See,
Trump.
I'm not nearly as well read on my French Revolution. It's just a black hole, to be honest, because there's so much, right? You start with the Revolution, and then the Revolution goes through all these phases, and then there's Napoleon, and then Napoleon leaves, and the king comes back, and then Napoleon III comes in. I'm like, I can't get my head around all this shit. It's just too much. I think there is
yada yada yada.
There's that Revolutions podcast. Like, what's that guy named? Mike Duncan. It's so long, but all my friends who have listened to it highly recommend it. So
I've listened. It's great.
Eventually, one day, I will get my head around the entire French Revolution. But let's kind of put this together with Trump and with Elon, kind of a fusing of the two forces. They did a joint interview on Fox News. Let's take a listen.
Tried it, then they stopped. That wasn't. They have many different things of hatred. Actually, Elon called me. He said, they're trying to drive us apart. I said, absolutely. No, they said, we have breaking news. Donald Trump has ceded control of the presidency to Elon Musk. President Musk will be attending a cabinet meeting tonight at 8 o'clock. And I say, it's just so obvious. They're so bad at it. I used to think they were good at it. They're actually bad at it, because if they were good at it, I'd never be president. Because I think nobody in history has ever gotten more bad publicity than me. I could do the greatest things. I get 98% bad publicity. I could do, outside of you and a few of your very good friends, it's like the craziest thing. But you know what I have learned, Elon? The people are smart. They get it.
Yeah, they do, actually.
They get it. They really see what's happening.
All right, so joint interview there by the White House with Donald Trump. Pretty obviously a move by Trump to quell some of the Elon as president, although I'm not so sure, because I've never seen Trump do that for literally anybody else. Maybe as vice president. I mean, that's it, a joint interview. I am coming around to the crystal point of view that there's something weird going on here. It's odd. I've never seen Trump like this act so not even subservient, but accepting of obviously an equal power center. I guess all we can take away from it is I think he just agrees with Elon. I mean, is that what it is? I really have no idea. what it is because, and look, I mean, I've said this before, I do think that there is like a popularist aspect to Doge. People hate the government. You know, they hate the government until they need the government. But in the interim, people hate the government and they don't have any particular, I don't think that outside of a lot of liberals who are reading the news constantly and like glued to their phones, I'm just not so sure that the so-called popular revolution against all this stuff will materialize. Maybe in the future, if you can pin a natural disaster or something on them, but I'm not seeing it at least yet outside of the Democratic faithful. All I took away from that interview is Trump is totally dedicated to him, which again, I think is crazy. I really don't understand this dynamic, how it really came to be and so close, especially because if you're a Trump aide or others, if you're Trump yourself, you want to be in control of your narrative. You want to be in control of your own story. Like even Vance works for Trump. He's not a separate power center in and of himself in the way that Elon is. And so Elon's main character energy, I always assumed would rub up against Trump, and maybe it will eventually in the future. But even to this extent, I never would have predicted that he would have tolerated anything like this.
Elon's out there doing his own thing and creating his own reality and then forcing Trump to respond to it. And it's quite incredible because I find myself in this very unusual and almost uncomfortable situation of kind of pulling for Trump.
Yeah,
being like,
Crystal's the same way.
Trump,
it's funny.
Like, stand up for yourself, man. Come on. And sort of pulling for the MAGA folks to be like, get some dignity and some self-respect here, guys. Like, you fought for 8 years to get back into power. And you let this guy come in September and stroke a check, and he gets to just be along for the ride. Like, don't you have any dignity here?
No, they don't. That's actually the actual answer. And I mean, look, maybe there's some lessons in this, is that being rich and famous is actually all that really matters in terms of the currency for Trump. Trump, in a certain sense, either agrees with all of this or he's fine. Maybe, let's say a galaxy brain case, which is Trump is here, more popular than ever, high approval rating. People are describing him as energetic. All he really cares about is tariffs and maybe Russia, Ukraine, right? Ish, but in terms of like getting on the phone, being president at a high level, and just let Elon deal with all the unpopular stuff, which all the donors and all these other people go crazy for. So I have all my donors are happy. The media is obsessed with a foreign target who's literally absorbing all the bad press. And I'm just sitting pretty up here at the top. Like he's like a whipping boy, I guess, for what the real agenda is. But like you said, that's not really what the quote real agenda was supposed to be. So I do honestly find the entire thing bizarre. I just think that at a certain level, Trump is fascinated by Elon. Maybe he buys the hype. Maybe he just...
In that spaces, he's like, you're an interesting character.
Yeah, he's like, he's an interesting character. Yeah, the way that he talks. I mean, Trump is... Whatever you can say about Trump, he's definitely a weird guy in his own right, but he's a very social person. He was a socialite for many years. He's met a lot of people. He has to know Elon is a total weirdo.
Yeah.
And yet, for some reason, it doesn't seem to rub him the wrong way, where anybody else who treated Trump like this would just never get away with it. At a policy level, there have been some flags here around some of the latest Doge cuts. Let's go ahead and put this one up on the screen. This was kind of a hilarious plot point. So there was, what was it? There were some cuts blind across the board. One of them was apparently at a nuclear weapons facility near Amarillo, Texas, where some 30% of cuts took place. And the nuclear weapons role of those workers and the feds who oversee it is some of the most sensitive missions apparently in the US. So after discovering that many of these workers who are in something called a probationary period, legally, feds hire people on a probationary period before they convert to full-time. While you're probationary, you can still be fired, and when you're not, it's just much more legally difficult to fire you. That probationary period can last up to 3 years, just so people understand. It's not like they've been disciplinary placed, it's just that they're more newer entrants. So anyway, the Trump administration just fired across the board all probationary employees, but apparently they have reversed it for these 28 employees who are in charge of the nuclear weapons facility. Also, for people who don't know, the nuclear weapons are overseen by by the Energy Department, which I've always found very interesting. That I forget exactly when it happened, but we decided to take away that authority specifically from the Pentagon and turn it into a civilian practice to make sure that civilian control, command and control over the nuclear chain of command always remained ironclad.
Yes, and the real heads, when they're adding up military spending,
Yeah, they add that. You're right.
they add that in, because when you're like, oh, how do we get to $1 trillion when a Department of Defense is this? It's like, well, because a lot of these other departments have spending that is fundamentally military. Yes, you can also be probationary if you get a promotion. So you could be 10 years in, and you get a promotion and a raise. It's only like a 3-month stretch, but there are definitely significant numbers of people who got a promotion in like December, and then found themselves like vulnerable to just getting whacked. And I think the politics of this can work out for Republicans if it's all spectacle. Like if they're launching a spectacular assault on federal workers, and you've got Democrats defending these federal workers, the public.
That's where we're at right now.
I would say. Yeah, the public probably sides with the attack on the federal workers. But if it goes beyond spectacle and is actual substance, which it seems like it is, like firing 10% of federal workers, that's a substantial cut. You risk genuinely harming things that voters want to be taken care of, like nuclear safety is an excellent example of it. Some of the stuff, for instance, getting rid of the people whose job it is to make sure that the last few birds of an endangered species like survive, like you're gonna drive a decent number of like animals into extinction. Does the public care about that?
I would say no.
Probably,
unless it's the bald eagle problem.
They probably don't. Now the next one, if we put this one up on the screen, huge cuts at the FAA. So I think we've had 9 airplane crashes since in the last month or so, including
military as well,
including the deadliest since like 2009. And to respond to that by cutting hundreds of FAA employees, some of whom say that they were directly involved with safety, to me is not just like offensive to me as an American citizen who wants to fly and not crash into a military helicopter or like just have the ship have the plane blow up.
Yeah,
it's also politically moronic, because now, if and when there is another plane crash, you can quite honestly and genuinely point to, hey, the way that Trump responded to 9 plane crashes at the beginning of his term was to fire hundreds of FAA employees, and now there are more crashes. And there's also reporting that FAA is allowing SpaceX technicians to come on in, and they're gonna show the FAA how to do things. And so you're taking full political control and responsibility for something that could be a huge political liability. So that's where the spectacle can work for Republicans, but if it drifts into substance and they actually destroy the government, which it seems like they're trying to do, that could actually backfire.
I totally agree. And I've always warned that about the DOGE stuff, where, look, USAID, I just don't think anybody will care outside of the people who actually work in that, or people in Africa. But FAA, I always point to that. And I also tried to really highlight how quickly public opinion can change. And I don't think people really understand how quickly you can go from like a 80% approval rating to 30 or like 35. It can happen on a dime and in the span of 9 months. Joe Biden, when he took office, he was like 74, 75%. Now, maybe it was fake. I don't know. You could say that. But by October, he's underwater as a result of Afghanistan, inflation, so much, so many different expiring programs. Nate Silver actually had a good tweet on this. He goes, keep in mind, Obama went from 69% approval rating to Democrats losing a Senate seat in Massachusetts in the span of less than a year. I always try to highlight that. Remember the Bush 04 to 05 period? He literally went from winning the popular vote and reaffirming all these conservative things about the country to getting absolutely blown out 18 months later
and how do you
in
do
public
that?
approval.
By going after Social Security.
Exactly. And Iraq, obviously those two things, you put them two together. So I'm just always pointing out with Doge and all of this, and as triumphal and all of this can sound, really good political movements and actors think strategically and in the long term. And these Doge cuts to the FAA is a perfect example of why. Why would you ever allow this? Why would you even give the Democrats the option of if there's another plane crash? You know they're going to crucify you. And that's what they did with FEMA under. So the Republicans did about FEMA. No, I'm talking about with the response to the North Carolina floods. Remember all of the FEMA dollars going to illegal immigrants? That was a real thing. People in North Carolina were really pissed about that. This is the same thing. You don't want that on your head no matter what. So can there be reform? Can there be change? The counter to what I'm saying is like you people are just talking heads. You guys are idiots. You don't even know what you're talking about. Never bet against Elon, right? These SpaceX guys, one of them is worth 15. Maybe, I don't know. That's one of those where we'll find out, I guess. It's a great national experiment.
I'm curious for your take on the NIH cuts too, because
I'm very pro that actually.
But I feel like this is a place where you and the people who are supportive of this are internet brained and are like, okay,
you're probably right.
They're connecting NIH to like funding the lab in Wuhan, which they did, and they should be criticized for, and they should actually, I think, ban all gain of function research, just like Obama did. And then they connect NIH to COVID hysteria and lockdowns. And then from there they say, well, NIH sucks, let's nuke NIH. And you throw in this idea that universities are, are hogs at the trough with the overhead that NIH is paying for. And then you convince yourself that, okay, this is actually a good target for us. This is a politically ripe target. When I think going after cancer research, going after medical research, just period, is a huge mistake just on a kind of human level, because government spending on medical research is the thing that drives the advances. And then the corporations, the big pharma comes in, they swoop up the innovations, they patent them, they make all the money off of it. That system should be changed, and they should not be able to make the amount of money that they're making off it, and it should be cheaper for us. But we do want this process happening where scientific advances happen, because they save lives.
Of course. Well, I just think it's a little bit more reductive. So, I mean, the university thing, for example, again, I grew up in a university town. My parents work in academia. I think universities are genuinely hogs at the trough. Okay, let's look at it this way. Let's look at actual spending by public universities, all of which books are public, and look at the rise of what? Administrative costs. Administrative cost accounts for the vast majority of tuition increase. A lot of this is DEI, but it's not just that. It's just general administrating bloat. So what the NIH thing did is it took it from 69 to a cap of 15%. Now, I talked about this with Crystal. They're like, oh, well, some of it is all this non-administrative cost, but like the base assumption within the NIH freeze in terms of the administrative cost freeze comes down to you guys are not good stewards of the taxpayer money. I think that's probably basically true. Anything, by the way, which attacks the center of gravity of university power, I'm also fine with. So I'm being very honest about where I would like to see a complete change in all university financing, which heavily relies on the government, as you said, also begs all of their alumni for money, plus the taxpayer, and student loan is like the architecture on top of all of that. But on the public research and medical financing thing, I'm not saying it's all bad. And obviously I think it's a case-by-case basis, but it's one of those where zoom out, and this is where I really just agree with a lot of the RFK critique. It's like, okay, we've been throwing all this money at all of this for literally decades, and actually the rates of disease are increasing. And actually fundamentally we have this wrong, which is all of the money goes into creating a quote drug when 90% of this could probably be solved by changing lifestyle factors. That's a much bigger zoom out thing. Nothing about the NIH will solve that today, but it's about philosophy and allocation of resources. Fundamentally, like political economy is the allocation of public resources to what you think is important. And so it's about thinking it, for me at least, if I were to create like a grand design of what I could, it would be moving dollars away from whatever, creating some drug or molecule or whatever that supposedly not even fixes cancer, because that's not really how it works, as opposed to looking at the lifestyle factors, food, subsidy, whatever, that leads to this explosion in cancer over the last 50 years or so.
No, I'd love to see them address the lifestyle front. I'm skeptical that they're actually going to do that. And I don't think you have to destroy you don't have to take the NIH money away from universities in order to do that. And I think our university system, it gets a lot of legitimate criticism, but it is also in many ways our crown jewel. Like, it is the thing that separates us from other countries. And you never know exactly how this stuff is going to work out. Because my wife's going through this now, I was actually studying how it is that the diagnosis that she has would have been basically a death sentence in the year 2000, and today is extremely treatable and will be hopefully just a bump in the road and go through treatment. And it was, in 1987, the UCLA hosted a conference where a Genentech scientist spoke and said, we've identified this HER2 protein. Or, I'll get the language of it wrong. He said, but we don't know what on earth to do with it. And this guy, Slayman, who was at the UCLA oncologist at the time, happened to be at the conference, and he heard it. He's like, I bet that there's a potential cancer link there. So he reaches out to the guy, gets some samples, tests them against the samples he got, and he discovers that in all of the biopsies he had, the HER2, the higher the positivity, the more aggressive the cancer was, and that was the one that was killing so many women. So he tells the Genentech person that. The Genentech person goes back to his lab and says, who can develop an antibody for this HER2? Because if we can actually hit this HER2, target it, we can actually stop this cancer from being so deadly. And then Genentech's like, yeah, we're not investing in cancer research anymore because it's not commercially viable right now. Too many cancer drugs, failed FDA, and if we fail another one, forget it.
Right.
So he goes around and this guy Slayman fights for NIH funding and other ways to make sure that this research actually gets done, and it has revolutionized the approach to breast cancer. And now, women who 20 years ago were dying from these diagnoses, in their 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and up, now are surviving almost.
I think that's amazing.
At huge rates.
No,
and without the NIH indirect money, and without the university system, and what was that conference where they met? That was overhead.
Yeah.
That's overhead.
Yes, right. Well, that's part of my point, is that there's definitely quote unquote justifiable expenses. I think you would probably agree with me, though, that by and large, the way that the current system is deeply corrupt, yes? Because it's not just about NIH, it's how many of these are funded by the pharmaceutical
the number of administrators that they've got now is absurd.
Yes. And it hasn't stopped them hawking for money, right? To every alumni,
but I think
every
you can
corporation.
do something about, just go directly at the administration, rather than saying the NIH is going to choke it off.
I think that's a totally fair point. And by the way, it will be a very politically
and they're going to start taxing endowments. So maybe maybe the tax on your endowment has to do with.
I'll eat a sock here if we actually tax endowment. I would love to see it. There's nothing I would love to see more than. How about we make that trade? We'll take the endowments. We'll tax it at 100%. We'll take all of that. We'll forgive student loans once, and then we'll get rid of the system. Right. And then fine, we can have as much NIH funding as we want. We'll even take a token amount from Harvard's endowment tax, and we'll give it to NIH funding.
As long as we make college free. Or affordable again. I don't know. Okay. Free. It doesn't have to be free, but back to the 1960s where you can actually afford it.
Yeah, I'm absolutely. I'm totally on board. That's part of what I'm saying, though, is that so much of the increase in tuition costs. If you ever go around. I highly encourage this. I use Claude. You can use ChatGPT or any of that, and peg university tuition inflation to the CPI. And see how it's up there with college textbooks and a few others from one of the single biggest increases in cost. It's ludicrous. And these administrators and others are getting filthy rich off of it. Hence my general skepticism where I'm like, I don't really trust a lot of what's going on here. But excellent point, Ryan. And I'm glad that she continues to do well. Let's move on and let's get to Israel.
A lot of new developments out of Israel, particularly as it relates to Netanyahu's claims that war with Iran may be in the offing and that the Trump administration is okay with it. This started last week with a quiet piece in the Washington Post. Israel likely to strike Iran in coming months, warns U.S. intelligence. And so think about the structure there. U.S., it's key that this is in the Washington Post. This is Washington, D.C.'s newspaper. U.S. intelligence officials leaked to that paper that they're concerned that Israel is going to strike Iran. There was a previous assessment under the outgoing Biden administration that there was a very high likelihood that Israel would strike Iran within the first 6 months of 2025. At the time, the Biden administration weighed whether or not it would kind of publicly endorse a move like that and decided not to. Israel now, Netanyahu now saying that he really has Trump's buy-in for this attack. Trump himself gave an interview with Fox News recently where he said this, something very similar to what Witkoff said, and we'll roll Witkoff in a second. Trump said, we will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and there's two ways to stop that. One is we blow up their nuclear facilities. Two is that we get a deal. And he says, he would much rather get a deal than launch a war. That's what you're hearing from Trump, but he's not ruling out that he would support an Israeli strike. If we can, here's Steve Witkoff recently in an interview talking about the role that Iran is playing in these ongoing Israeli negotiations. It's role C3.
Iran is the benefactor, but of course, the largest issue is the nuclear. And the president has said they will not get a bomb. Them getting a bomb is devastating to the region. It will force every other country in that region to get a bomb too. We'll have a nuclear arms race, and that simply can't happen. But the president has also said this can be solved diplomatically. And if Iran shows an interest in solving it diplomatically, the American government remains open to those discussions. And so I hope that it can be solved diplomatically, because the alternative is not such a good alternative.
And so we've talked about this before, that all of this is happening in the context of the Israel-Gaza war. And if the Israeli assault on Gaza were the only thing, were a kind of isolated geopolitical contest, then Trump's support for Netanyahu's ability to just wipe it off the map, I think would be unchecked.
I totally agree.
But it's happening in the context of this more regional consideration where Trump very much wants a Saudi-Israeli peace deal, normalization between the two. He also wants an Iran nuclear deal. Mm-hmm. I think he sees this as, a potential legacy item. It's deeply ironic, of course, because Obama struck one and then Trump immediately ripped it up. But now he believes that he can be, recognized as this great deal maker if he can get back into the deal that he ripped up. And so it is the one thing that is giving the ceasefire oxygen and giving it legs, keeping it alive. You can put up C4 here. This is from DropSite's Twitter feed. So Israel struck and killed two police officers in Gaza who were guarding an aid convoy. Hamas has said that Israel's continuing to attack and kill people inside Gaza. Puts the ceasefire in jeopardy. They said the attack on Palestinian police officers guarding aid trucks in southern Gaza, quote, clear violation of the ceasefire. Trump, quote, and then says that Trump should not believe that it's going to be easy to go along with Netanyahu's idea here, and Trump's idea that they're just going to clear everybody out. This is, quote, Trump, quote, has no clue about the resistance of the Palestinians. He has no clue about how the Palestinians are connected to their homeland. It's not real estate. It's a homeland. He argued that every time Israeli officials have spoken about the, quote, elimination of Hamas, the group has only grown stronger. And I do think it is accurate to say that every time Trump says that when he wants all of the Palestinians out and he's not going to let them back, his position gets weaker. Like you say that out loud, mm-hmm. you're not going to win people over that way. And so that is what Trump is saying, but what Trump is actually doing is the status quo. On Saturday, you had the hostage exchange go off as planned. So you had all of this talk about war with Iran, Trump and Netanyahu demanding that every single hostage needed to be out by Saturday, or else they were going to all hell will break loose
so
again.
Happened. Yeah, at least.
And instead, Witkoff gets back in there and he's like, no, like we've got a deal. We're going to continue with this deal, and so the deal goes off. So the latest news is that Netanyahu, he spoke last night at this major pro-Israel conference. He has authorized finally his negotiators to go back to Cairo and continue with the negotiations toward phase 2. And phase 2 is the part that Witkoff is trying to make sure is completed, because that is the part where all of the remaining hostages are exchanged, and reconstruction is then supposed to begin, and it's supposed to be a permanent ceasefire. Yeah. The question of what role Hamas plays is the one that's being negotiated. Hamas is sending a lot of signals that they're willing to just step back, that they're willing to demilitarize, that a technical, a bunch of technocrats, either affiliated with the Palestinian Authority or not, but under the auspices of the guarantee of U.S., Egypt, UAE, others, could actually be the ones to play a role in the reconstruction. That they understand that may be the thing that has to happen. It is telling that it is the Israelis who are the obstacle to this situation, because once they make that concession, at that point what's the argument from Israel that you can't allow this? Like they've said, like
war,
surrender and give us the hostages and it's over, and that's effectively what they would be saying.
So what do you make then of this reversion back to phase 2? Because first first the deal was off, now the deal is back on. Why? For what purpose? Is it some grand deal with Iran? Because that Washington Post report is very troubling, right? Is that basically the Biden people at the end, of course, by the way, they leak it at the end. They're like, by the way, while we were in office, we discovered they wanted to attack Iran. I'm like, well, maybe you should have done something about it. But that would be asking too much, unfortunately.
One possibility is that, so think about it this way. If Trump really does want a permanent ceasefire, Saudi-Israeli normalization, and an Iran nuclear deal, that costs a lot of capital with the Miriam Adelson kind of wing of his financing. So if he really does want that, what does he have to do? He has to build up capital first. And how do you build up capital?
Green light.
By being a complete lunatic in, hey, you want to ethnically cleanse all of Gaza? Go for it.
I'll do it for you.
I'll do it for you. Yeah. And you see this too with North Korea. He'll talk about wiping them off the face of the earth,
right?
And then he'll come in and do the thing he wants to do, which is some type of a.
So you're buying the madman theory.
So I think if you do buy that he wants a deal here, it is rational that he would at this point be acting like a madman. So that when Netanyahu later gets screwed, Trump can say, look, I did everything I could. I was even willing to do full-on ethnic cleansing for you, but it's just not feasible. So we have to get serious about this. And Egypt is saying that they've got a plan where it's a 3 to 5 year reconstruction. It does not involve Hamas anymore, and the government
pay for it.
UAE and Saudi will pay for it. And look, I would love to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians even more than you would. But Bibi, it's just not feasible. It's not doable. And I'm not sending American troops. And when you send Israeli troops, all they do is do TikToks and get themselves killed, and lead to ICC indictments and ICJ allegations of genocide, and the complete, just embarrassing yourself and further isolating yourself on the world stage. So look, can't do that. We're going to have to do a deal. Like that's a best case scenario, perhaps.
Right. What's the mid case scenario? Because what if it's all just torn? It's all just. What I can't get my head around is why, because as you just said, and look, if Obama had ever say all hell will break loose and then didn't attack Hamas after they
the red line.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine what the Tom Cottons and all of them of the world would look like? I've always seen Trump as somebody who talks big, but never actually wants to follow through. I mean, occasionally you can point to a few things, the Qasem Soleimani killing, for example. But there were a lot of, I mean, actually, I was supposed to interview Trump the day, you remember that American spy plane that got shot down? It was unmanned. It was like it was a Navy plane that was shot down.
Right around then?
2018. And I was supposed to interview him that day, got canceled. And apparently what came out is that Trump had ordered a retaliatory strike that John Bolton had been pushing. But then at the last minute, he was like, hey, you know what? We shouldn't kill any of these Iranians. They didn't kill any of our people. Let's not kill any of theirs. Bolton and all of them were furious. He seems to have like a duality inside him.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like on the one hand, says we're gonna own Gaza.
Right.
We're gonna ethnically cleanse it ourselves. I'll do it for you. Yeah. And then on the other hand, he's like, maybe we should sit with Russia and China and we'll all just cut all of our military spending. Yeah. And you're like, wait, what? It's like, well, which one of these is true? What's going on here? So yeah, I don't know. I'm worried about the Israel thing only because it does seem that Israel has played him very well. Not only do they have the Miriam Adelson connection, they have effectively, well, yes, Trump has pushed them around, Witkoff and others. He does obviously accept the framing on Iran. You and I know institutionally, nothing would make more political sense in Washington terms than to support an Israeli strike on Iran. That's where the majority of the GOP is. Now, there are important characters in the Trump universe, JD, I would hope, being one of them, but also many of the people who Trump has appointed to the Pentagon oppose the very type of strike, very strongly oppose. Yeah. And so maybe they will win out. Are they even in the room? We don't know. And so that's what I think that the big war behind the scenes is. But I mean, look, at the very least, I'm just happy. Let phase 2 go 3. Let people stop getting killed.
The risk in Trump's madman strategy, of course, is that Netanyahu won't recognize it for just the madness that it is and think it's real. In Netanyahu's speech last night to this pro-Israel conference, he said, you know, Trump's idea for Gaza has opened up possibilities for us that we never even dreamed were possible, and we are going to pursue that with everything we have.
Yes.
So he thinks he's taking Trump seriously and literally, and he's going to try to take this moment to effectuate what Trump put out as a possibility. The question is, can Witkoff reel him in enough, and how much agency does Netanyahu actually have? And we don't know. Meanwhile, let's talk about a little bit of the reporting that's been coming out lately. 972, an Israeli investigative news outlet, we actually partnered with them on a story about a month ago. Reminder that that a lot of their stuff has to go through a censor. So the stuff that comes out has been already, the IDF says yes, but so consider that when you when you think about the pieces that have been coming out of there. We can put up C5. This is an investigation by Yuval Abraham in 972, which exposed one of the more horrifying, like cinematic horror film anecdotes. The IDF came across a couple in their 80s who told the Israeli soldiers that because of their disabilities, the man walks with a cane, that they were unable to evacuate the area with their family, and so they're still in northern Gaza. And this is according to 972, and like I said, went through the censor. They strap explosives around this couple and use them as human shields. They call them mosquitoes, is one of the terms for them. Use them as human shields going through the neighborhood while they're clearing it of Hamas fighters, and then at the end execute them. Just levels of criminality on display that are almost unimaginable. And this comes after 972 very recently reported that the IDF had discovered that when it dropped these bunker buster bombs, that as a consequence of the explosion, it released an enormous amount of carbon monoxide and basically burning up all of the oxygen in these tunnels. And so they understood that this was a conventional bomb that operated as a chemical weapon, and that if they knew or if they guessed that somebody that they were trying to kill was in a tunnel, but they didn't know within 500 meters or more where they were, they could drop some of these bunker busters and it would asphyxiate, it would suffocate everyone in the tunnel. What they what 972 also reported is that there were essentially no precautions taken to make sure that there were no hostages in the area. And they know for a fact now that as a result of that, a significant number of Israeli hostages were suffocated through this bomb and asphyxiate strategy. Eventually, they started requiring commanders to take some assessment of whether or not they were going to kill hostages. And so the killing of hostages has apparently diminished recently.
Horrific.
But absolutely horrifying stuff coming out of 972. Any thoughts on any of this before we move to the next one?
I just don't even know what to say. It's just horrible. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, and it fits with the testimony of a lot of the surviving hostages about the conditions that they were
their
filmed.
number one fear was
and that they were going to be
the
killed.
constant bombing.
They could remember. They said they're like, I could hear the bombs falling above me. It's horrifying.
Constantly. Yeah. And then two other things to talk about before we move on. Curious for your take on this. I think it's within the realm of possibility.
If he pulls off phase 2, then yes.
All right, fascinating.
But there's a lot to be said.
Fascinating political piece here. Trump privately calls Steve Witkoff, quote, a modern-day Kissinger. And if there's going to be an American diplomat who shakes up American foreign policy and actually gets something accomplished, it would stand to reason that it would be somebody that comes from out of the fold. And I think I've seen you talking about this. In some ways, international real estate is as good
realm.
Good a training ground.
Yes.
It's almost as good as when Trump made Exxon's CEO.
Rex Tillerson,
the Secretary of State.
Although he was a terrible secretary.
It turned out to be terrible, but you would think that being the CEO of Exxon would actually be an American diplomat.
I'll tell you that I'm very pro Witkoff.
Yeah.
Witkoff has all of the ingredients that you need for a great international diplomat. International finance, worked in Vegas, used to putting together like complex deals. Most importantly, has the total trust of the president because apparently they've been friends for like 20 or 30 years or whatever, or 40 years. 40-year friendship. So actual ironclad trust. Their proven track record now, he yelled at Bibi, got him to do at least phase 1. There are a lot of hostages who owe their lives to Steve Witkoff. Whatever else happens, there are 30, 40 people, and who knows how many Palestinians. You literally owe your life to Steve Witkoff. Witkoff got that guy Mark Fogel released, that Russian, or the guy who was being held by Russia. He is today in Saudi Arabia with Secretary Rubio, meeting with the Russian foreign minister to specifically negotiate. Apparently, he and Putin had a long discussion about Ukraine whenever Witkoff was in Russia to secure the release of Mark Fogel. So if he gets phase 2, and or if he is successful in negotiating a Ukraine peace deal, then he's absolutely the next messenger.
Give it to him. We won't talk. We're not going to go into what we mean.
We don't need
Kissinger.
Ryan's Cambodian.
We're not going to go into Kissinger for now.
Right.
Let's just set that aside. Last piece. Our buddy Mike Gallagher, former congressman.
That's right.
Was lead sponsor of the TikTok bill in the House, now an executive over at Palantir because this is Washington, D.C. That's how that goes. Became the latest person involved in the effort to ban TikTok, which is now back in the App Store, to say out loud how it was that it got over the hump. We'll play this clip in a second. What we don't mention here, Mark Warner, who was on the Senate side, the guy.
He already said this.
The IC guy. Right. And he's on the stage too.
Right.
And he says, I want to hear whether Mike tells the real story, the true story of how this happened. And Gallagher did tell the true story. Let's roll this.
A bipartisan consensus. We had the executive branch, but the bill was still dead until October 7th. And people started to see a bunch of anti-Semitic content on the platform. And our bill had legs again.
And so producer Mac made a great point when he was watching this too. Because you can sort of see Gallagher trying to clean it up where he's like, after October 7th, that's when it got its momentum. He's like, oh, that's not going to sound exactly right. So then he shoehorns in, because there was a whole lot of anti-Semitic content on TikTok. There was not a whole lot of anti-Semitic content on TikTok. What there were a lot of videos from Palestinians in Gaza of them getting killed, maimed, and their neighborhoods getting destroyed. And so it allowed the American public to connect directly in a parasocial way with real human beings on the ground and bypass the cable news, New York Times version of what was happening. He retcons that to anti-Semitism, but Mac's funny point, not funny, wait a minute, anti-Semitism on a social media platform is a reason to ban it? Have you ever logged on to X?
X.com?
I
actually refuse to call it X.com.
Have you ever logged on to Twitter lately? It is, Kanye is like the moderate one on Twitter right now. It is an absolute cesspool of unadulterated, straight up anti-Semitism.
Well, I don't support banning anything for quote unquote anti-Semitism.
Right. But if we did, it would not be TikTok alone that would get rolled up in it. But, just another, Romney has said this before, Warner, Blinken. So there's no mystery about what it was that gave the final push. Yes, the national security establishment wanted to ban it before that, but they couldn't get the...
Listen, I was pro-ban TikTok since 2018. Even I'll say that's why it happened. Now, sometimes you do good things for the wrong reasons, but it's okay.
Yes.
And by the way, Trump, I don't even know why you guys are complaining anymore. You won.
I know.
Right? Yeah, it's just like,
back,
stop. We're the ones who sit here lost, right?
I know, why are these... That was what was funny. They're on that stage celebrating as if they won.
Right. It's like,
how
we lost.
How did we win this victory? It's like
Trump just came in and was like, actually, no, we're not doing this at all. Like,
it'd be like if the refs came in at the very end and were like, okay, actually, the Chiefs won.
Yeah. That's right. It was at one point that much of a blowout in the TikTok victory, but I knew, in my heart, I always knew Trump would. I gave up. When Trump started talking about TikTok on the campaign trail, I'm like, it's game over.
The young people love me on TikTok.
No, it's not. It's not just the whole young people thing. IRL, what it is Jeff Yass, his huge donor, who's a huge stake, whispering in his ear in Mar-a-Lago for the last 4 years. On top of Trump, maybe this fits with the Elon thing. At the end of the day, he respects only one thing: commodity of attention. That's it. There's nothing else that he respects more in the world. Hence, he's like, okay, I'm pro TikTok. So there we go. All right, let's talk about the Democrats. This is objectively hilarious. Jon Stewart interviewing Jen Psaki with some shocking moments for Jen Psaki, not for everybody else. Let's take a listen.
I've been shocked by how undemocratic the Democratic Party can be.
Tell me, what do you mean by, I don't disagree with you necessarily, but what do you mean by that?
By putting their foot on the scales to get, make sure that Hillary Clinton comes out of the thing, or make sure that, that they're listening to that anger about the way that even the ACA, quite frankly, struck me as a very conservative.
You mean because it didn't have a public option in it?
Correct. That it didn't address the very thing that was causing the foundational upset. If I were to break this down narratively, what I think the Democrats have forgotten is government may not be perfect, but it's the only thing large enough to offset multinational corporate exploitation and corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't act like that's urgent and that affects people's lives, then so if the big policies that we make are billions more dollars to insurance companies that we think are fucking people over left and right for their healthcare, so isn't that part of why people lost faith?
Yeah. So yes, I think we're saying, well, I'm trying to say something similar, which is this.
Boom, boom.
Which is Democrats just lost everything. They control nothing. They control, they don't control the House. They don't control the Senate. They don't control the White House, and they don't control the Supreme Court. So now is the time to break some shit, right? And break some China.
They do control the email lists that continue to ask for money.
All right, break it down for me, Ryan. What's your personal favorite? My favorite was, whenever he talks about that.
We're going to go there.
Goes, she's like, but that's ancient history. We've moved on from that.
My favorite was when she, and you can roll it back and see it, she literally rolls her eyes at the public option.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
She's like, oh God, this again, the freaking public option.
She's like, we moved past this, John. What are you still fighting these fights for? Okay, so
these damn people who wanted the government to come in and solve a major problem in their lives, and that's what gets the eye roll. The whole thing is just personally demoralizing in the sense that looking back at my career, which came in before the public option, but like I spent a year and a half covering the fight over the public option. and then cover the 2016 presidential campaign, and knowing that like, if they would have listened to people like us, there's a good chance you fend off this populist right and instead channel the energy into a populist left. They didn't, and so it's like I don't have the energy to even do the I told you so's and like with Psaki, like, and she and I are both like yeah. But to me it's like, well, you guys won, everybody lost. And it is what it is.
And she's on MSNBC now.
And she's on
and she's got the power. She's got the wine moms in her pocket. I don't mean the entire
I don't know how much in their pocket. I feel like the Democratic base is really pissed off.
Yeah, okay, so I've been talking about this with Crystal. What do you make of all this Democratic activism? Like, is it real?
There's a
so people are lighting up the phone lines, right? But now I don't take phone line as so. Just because your base is pissed off about something does not indicate that the entire country is pissed off about something. It just means your base is. So you would see this all the time with Republicans, right? So for, what was it when Obergefell happened? You had a bunch of Christian Republicans light up Republican phone lines, be like, what are you guys going to do about this? Doesn't mean that being anti-gay marriage or whatever was popular, but it did mean it animated a certain percentage of the population. What do you make of the Democratic activism right now?
I think the key thing to understand is that our understanding of Democratic activism is mediated through the mainstream media because those organs are more associated with the center left, the New York Times, the MSNBC, CNN, and MSNBC and CNN have basically given up. Like they're not leading the resistance the way that they did in 2017. And so you could have similar levels of anger from Democrats across the country as you had in 2017, but you wouldn't hear about it because you're not going to hear it from like the Joe Rogan like universe. Like they don't care. That's not the thing that they are covering. And if you don't hear it from CNN and MSNBC, then you're not going to hear it from anybody, basically. And so you have to actually be in it to see it. And so as a result of that, the broader public doesn't see the energy out there, and Democrats in Congress are just annoyed at it. I saw that. You saw Crystal's thing.
Yeah, I did.
And I think we might have Ezra Levine on Wednesday on Counterpoints.
Okay.
He's like public enemy number one.
Who is he? Move on.
He's the Indivisible co-founder because he's like, they've got millions of people who have ideas.
So then let me ask you what I asked her. What are they supposed to do?
Well, the thing they want them to do is to fight around the March 14th budget and to say, and to check Elon. Like what they're trying to do is we need to check Elon Musk with our power in the House because congressional Republicans need our votes to do a government funding bill.
So they want to act like the Tea Party, basically.
Yeah, and the only thing they want is some checks on Doge. Like that's the thing. They're like, let's fight for something, and let's stop Elon Musk from destroying the federal government. Like that's the thing they want.
So I don't know. I still grapple with. It's because we was talking with Crystal and she was like, all you have is attention. And I'm like, it's like, do people want to see Maxwell Frost like do a sit-in in front of the USAID bill? I mean, you just think you look like an idiot, personally. Is that what the Democratic base wants? Like, they want them to fight on the budget issue? Would that even be enough for them? Like, if I think back to the Tea Party and like what they were able to do, it took taking super unpopular positions, holding the government hostage, and you needed Fox News, like a constant media drumbeat. Yeah, which they don't have. But I mean, maybe they do. I mean, I was looking at Midas Touch, which I try to pay attention to them now because I think they're like the heart of the Democratic resistance. And I mean, a lot of this stuff is like, I don't see politicians per se like engaging with it. A lot of it is just like Trump loses it as he gets laughed at by the world. 716,000 views. A lot of it is like dunk on Trump content, which I guess obviously there's still an appetite for. No hate. Listen, it's a free market. I wish you guys the best, but I don't see how that translates into being a Democratic politician. I just don't understand how they are supposed to channel that energy, because we talked about this last time, which is that Russiagate was fake at the end of the part of the reason why they're so demoralized is they staked everything on a genuine lie about it was an undemocratic literal lie about Donald Trump. And so that's why they don't have any ground to fight on. And that's why I don't know what the quote unquote Democratic base wants their politicians to fight on when all they're fighting, it's like for what? The integrity of USAID? It's like, okay, I mean, be my guest. I just don't see how that hits at all.
Maybe education department, like FAA, NIH, like that kind of stuff. We'll see. March, we're less than a month away from this funding deadline. And who knows what stuff Elon Musk breaks between now and then, if anything.
True. I mean, that's the risk, though. But at the end of the day, it's still reactive. You're waiting for your enemy to screw up as opposed to like proposing anything else. We see some of this with Hakeem Jeffries, by the way. Let's take a listen.
Donald Trump's favorability rating is actually higher than it ever was the first time around. Let me ask you, a recent poll by Marquette looked at several of the things that he has done or says that he is going to do, and 63% favor federal government's recognition of only two sexes, 60% favor deporting immigrants who entered the United States illegally, 60% favor expanding oil and gas production, 59% favor declaring an emergency at the southern border. Is there anything you are seeing that Trump is doing that you are in favor of, that you think is the right thing?
Let me say, as it relates to all of those issues, we're just at the beginning. And the core promise that Donald Trump made is that he's going to lower costs for everyday Americans. In fact, we were told that grocery prices would go down on day one, on January 20th. Costs aren't lower. In fact, costs are increasing. The price of eggs is skyrocketing out of control. Inflation is on the way up. That was the core promise that's been broken. With respect to immigration, listen, we have to secure the border. We have a broken immigration system, and we need to fix it in a comprehensive and bipartisan way. At the same period of time, as Democrats, we're going to protect dreamers, protect farm workers, and protect families who help our communities across the country thrive.
I don't even know where to start with this guy. He's got negative charisma, no political response. That is where I do feel somewhat sympathy for the liberals out there, where I'm like, man, it's like. But I will tell you, you're the people who set up the system that promoted the Hakeem Jeffries of the world and the complete monarchy of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer over the Democratic Party, where they can handpick whoever they want. There's not even a semblance of popularity whenever it comes to who's controlling the response for this party, who just suffered a massive loss.
So this was one of the more demoralizing moments too, when the left knocked Joe Crowley out, who was supposed to be the next speaker.
Right.
And he was caucus chair at the time. And so then Barbara Lee runs for caucus chair against Hakeem Jeffries, who is Crowley's protege.
Yes.
And Jeffries wins. So it's like, I just don't have the energy.
You're just, what are the activists? They'd be like, I'm just so tired of being tired.
I was tired of being tired. I was. But what's interesting is that, and what's interesting about that clip in particular, Jeffries, whatever you think about his politics, is actually one of the more talented communicators that they've ever had in a leadership role. And that was not an energetic performance at all. And I think that there's substance and a structural problem but beneath it. In 2017, 2018, when Democrats are feeling their oats, Hakeem Jeffries could get on any cable program or get on the House floor and give a speech that to Democrats was inspiring because they had a sense of what their moral core was, and Trump, and it was immigration, and he was treating Trump was evil and awful, and they were going to stand up to him, and they don't have that anymore. At the end, he finishes by what the Democratic compromise is on immigration, rather than what it used to be, the yard sign that said all are welcome. All are welcome, it has a moral urgency to it. And that allowed people like Jeffries to speak with more confidence. And so to have somebody who's as good a communicator as him sound so bad and so to lack so much confidence suggests that the Democrats really just don't have their footing.
I agree. They just.
And he's got a clean hit with the hey, didn't you say you were going to do something about inflation?
Yes.
Like that's their cleanest hit.
Right. But they're so dizzied by Elon and all this other stuff. They just don't know what to do. Well, I'm sure we'll keep talking about it. It is one of the central stories. It's kind of hilarious, honestly, to see them all fall apart. Let's get to Luigi. What do you have for us on Luigi?
All right, so our man, Luigi Mangione.
He's back. Your man, not mine. Although I have to be honest, Luigi and I have a lot in common. We both love Japan.
That's right. You
We
read
have a lot of
of-
theory. We both
read a lot of
share
the same theory.
We read a lot of the same books. We share a lot of the same theories about Japan. I guess we both do hate. We both hate corporate healthcare. So but that's something that a lot of us have in common. He has become a leftist icon. Although every
Even though he's
single
on the right.
I wouldn't
Yeah,
say
I
he's
mean,
on the right. He's like
it's this esoteric.
yeah, it's a stupid thing. I think I described him as a right-wing anarcho-capitalist. That's probably the best description. Although anybody who just murders someone in cold blood is probably not all the way together, but nonetheless has become a popular figure.
And so his lawyers.
Speaks.
Luigi speaks. His lawyers have put out a statement. We can put this up on the screen. He says, "I am overwhelmed by and grateful for everyone who has written me to share their stories and express their support. Powerfully, this support has transcended political, racial, and even class divisions, as mail has flooded Metropolitan Detention Center from across the country and around the globe. While it is impossible for me to reply to most letters, please know that I read every one that I receive. Thank you again to everyone who took the time to write. I look forward to hearing more in the future." The lawyers also posted an FAQ on LuigiMangioneInfo.com, which tells you everything anybody might want to know about Luigi. Where is he? Like, for instance, may I send him items like books?
Let's put E2 up there on the screen. Because the funny part about this is FAQ is it represents all of the mail that they're getting. Can I send mail to Luigi? Can he respond? Are there any restriction on his mail? May I send him books? Can I send him photos? Did you see that? Can I send him photos? So ladies or men, or men.
He has asked people to limit the number of photos they send to 5.
Yes, no, listen to this. Due to the volume of photos, they could take longer than usual to be screened and shared. So,
and also, quote, please note that every photo that is received is screened and reviewed by law enforcement. Just an FYI for those of you who are sending pics.
Can you imagine this guy's inbox? He's in jail. How can I sign up for official court information? What else can I send Luigi as part of this? Other than books, mail, news article, or photos, no other items. The Bureau of Prisons does not allow packages from outside of the facility. Everything must be purchased through his commissary account.
And then it says, how can I contribute to Luigi?
Right.
Yeah. And that it links to his Give, Send, Go, which has a goal of $1 million raised, and so far has raised, according to this, $467,754 from, it looks like, more than 15,000 people. More than 1,000 people have done the praying for Luigi.
Okay.
Which is, okay, that's where I'm going to go with weird, because it's like, if you're praying, I assume you're Christian or Muslim, Jewish, like you've got some idea about the sanctity of life, and he did kill somebody, allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. That's right. He hasn't been proven guilty. You know, today there's a documentary. Actually, it's apt that we're doing this. A documentary premieres about him today from HBO, which is it's a
rushing
1 hour one. But yeah, apparently, like in the hours after the killing, there were 4 separate doc deals that were signed, like Netflix, HBO, and I mean, look, I'm gonna watch it. Let's be honest, I'm gonna watch it. You know? I'm gonna watch White Lotus, and then I'm gonna watch the Luigi thing. It just has to be done. It's really, it's one of those where I'll probably watch everything about it. It's like the Fire Festival. You know, did we need 2 documentaries? Apparently,
I think we did.
We did.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just think it's fascinating because it hasn't been in the news for what, 2 months, almost 3 months now since all of this, but it's pretty clear there's still a lot of public interest in the case. And I don't know. I mean, I remember Ken and Crystal and everybody else talking about it and be like, you can just see the explosion of, if not outright support, or at the very least disgust for the healthcare guy. But if you look at the Democratic response, none of it seems to incorporate any of that popular energy. Like we just played that clip of Hakeem Jeffries. And it couldn't be more out of step with whatever the hell this is. I mean, there's a lot of people out there apparently sending thirst traps to Luigi Mangione, printing them out and sending them to the Bureau of Prisons, which, you need help. But I don't know. I mean, serial killers also get that stuff apparently all the time. So what do I know?
Yeah,
there's a weird segment of the public out there.
Luigi's defense probably still rests on the potential of jury nullification.
You think so? Well, okay, so explain this one to me too. Doesn't he have two separate charges? There's state charge
state
and federal charge.
yeah.
So what's the difference? What's the federal charge that's against him?
I guess
Because I was reading on his website, I didn't quite understand it. It's
depriving somebody of their civil rights by killing them.
Okay,
is
so
the way that
I
they
didn't
do
even know
that.
that he would do that. Is it because he crossed interstate lines? Is it because he went from Pennsylvania to, from New York to Pennsylvania?
I guess that would qualify. The feds will often do this if they think that the
state won't handle it properly.
Can't handle it, yeah.
Right. So there's People versus Mangione, New York State. There's Commonwealth of PA versus Mangione, and then there's USA versus Mangione at the federal level. I was just trying to understand. I was like, well, what did he do in Pennsylvania?
And sometimes
possession of a false identification, probably something like that.
Sometimes this will happen to cops where they will be acquitted or not charged. More often, I think not charged because there's some double jeopardy implications.
Okay.
If you're acquitted. Not charged, but at the state level, and then the feds will come in and do a civil rights case against the cop. So I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Well, so it is here. Traveled in interstate commerce with the intent to kill, injure, harass, intimidate, and place under surveillance with the intent to kill. That's the federal. It's stalking is the charge that has been leveled against him, and then murder through use of a firearm on top of firearms offenses that I guess stack on top of.
Right, because he did the interstate thing.
Because of the interstate. All right, well, lesson in our justice system. I'm sure I still think it'll be the trial of the century. We all know it will. In terms of the public interest in downtown in New York City, there's going to be a lot going on
Stay tuned.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, Ryan, you've got a good segment for us. Let's get to it.
All right, woke or base?
All right, I'm ready. Hit me.
Okay, so we can throw up E1 here. So there was this article that came out in Breitbart recently.
Yes.
Biden antitrust holdover, Doha Mekki continued woke agenda instead of taking on big tech, with a photo of Doha Mekki there.
Okay.
And this is just such a fascinating, I think, entree into our current politics that I wanted to unpack this thoroughly and play a game with Saagar called Woke or Base.
Right,
because
as a reminder to the audience, I have not seen any of this.
She's not seen this.
I have no idea what's coming.
And so in this Breitbart article, so we both have done enough Washington reporting that we know that sometimes articles are the powerful work of journalistic endeavors.
And some of it's fed to you.
Other times you get an Oppo document that's just fed to you. And as you read this one, we don't know. You can never say for 100% certain where it came from, but you're like, did this Breitbart guy really come up with all of these different examples, or were these packaged? So it looks like Oppo, and which means corporate Oppo at this point, not partisan Oppo. And so the key part here of this article, put up E2 here, that Breitbart writes, many populist Republicans, including J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley, also supported Biden's antitrust chief, Jonathan Kanter, for continuing the work of the first Trump administration with lawsuits against Apple and Google. Slater, who's an incoming Trump anti-chief enforcer, will almost certainly continue these lawsuits against big tech. However, after Kanter resigned on December 18th, his woke deputy, Doha Mekki, took over as acting antitrust chief and pushed through many radical actions in the last weeks of Biden's lame duck presidency. So the two-step here is interesting. What they're trying to say is like, okay, we acknowledge that Jonathan Kanter, Lena Khan, that entire anti-monopoly universe in the Democratic ecosystem is cool because it was doing the same stuff that Trump was doing. So they realize they can't really attack that because it has populist bona fides that are impregnable. But they're saying this woke lady came in and did a bunch of mean things to corporate America because she's woke. And so we're going to go through their bill of indictment against Doha Mekki for being woke, and let's actually click the links that they provide to decide whether or not the action they're describing is woke or is it base.
Okay, what do we got?
So in the final weeks of the Biden administration, MECI issued rules addressing, quote, HR policies, which typically have nothing to do with antitrust policy. So the guidelines provide examples and cite cases to explain how the agencies analyze business practices that may violate antitrust laws. The guidelines also explain that certain types of agreements between employers, such as wage fixing or no-poach agreements, may expose companies and executives to criminal liability under the antitrust laws. So what did MECI do? She told companies around the country that if you enter into no-poach agreement, wage fixing, those types of non-competes, that not only could you be civilly liable, you could also even be criminally liable.
Okay.
Is that woke or is that based?
I would say based. I would personally say based. Telling a company what to do and not to exploit people is supposed to be based, but apparently it's woke here. All right.
Yeah. So, I forgot. We're dedicating this segment to none other than Hillary Clinton for her the most woke comment ever made on behalf of corporate America.
Yes.
Which defines basically an entire era. So roll E4 here to remind people.
If we broke up the big banks tomorrow, and I will, if they deserve it, if they pose any systemic risk, I will. Would that end racism? No. Would that end sexism? No. Would that end discrimination against the LGBT community?
That's
one of Crystal's favorites.
Yeah, that's the essence of corporate America using woke language to defend itself, saying, don't break up the big banks. Why? Because that won't end racism.
Solve gay rights.
It won't solve gay rights. It won't do all these other things.
Okay.
Okay. So we got one for based here. Okay. Next, Breitbart says, quote, she issued a last-minute lawsuit against 6 major landlords in line with the Biden administration's blaming AI and landlords rather than his own inflationary policies for high rent. Right. So you can put up, I believe this is E6.
Okay.
Which I don't even think I need to explain to you or to the audience, this one. So this was...
Yeah, we covered this one.
Yeah, we covered this. This is a MECI policy that she rolled out, attacking landlords over juicing rent. Is it woke or based?
I gotta go with based. I gotta go with based personally. But I mean, let's make this clear. I don't speak for quote MAGA populist right or any of these people. And even woke and or based, it basically gets defined in terms of liberalism and who the person is. So for example, if you fire, like you're talking about, this is what basically I think the point you're trying to make. If you have a lady who's a lib and you own that lib, that's based, right? In terms of the culture war. The problem is that when you actually look at some of these policies and things like that, some of these these definitions fall apart, and that is part of the problem with a lot of the attack vector. This kind of gets to the whole idea of Doge versus MAGA and what it even means. But part of the thing I always try to point out is like, guys, MAGA is whatever Trump wants it to be. Right. And that's where there are a lot of people who are like, this doesn't fit with what Trump ran on. I'm like, well, you know, the thing is, Trump at the end of the day, yeah, he said a lot of stuff. But what did he really say? I alone can fix it. And I increasingly think that's really what Trump was all about. And to the extent that he's good or he's bad or he's MAGA or whatever, it's whatever it aligns in terms of his transactional reality and whatever happens to be him feeling that day. But if he had faith in some sort of broader agenda, I mean, honestly, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you didn't hear it here.
Luckily,
I can tell you that.
Luckily, I didn't have any faith.
Yeah.
All right, so we got 2 more. So this next one is she sued KKR over paperwork violations.
Okay.
That's how Breitbart describes it. So basically, KKR, massive private equity firm that does mergers and acquisitions. Yeah. There are federal laws that require that if you're doing a major merger, that you submit a filing, with the Department of Justice. Here's what we're doing so that you can review this. KKR came up with a clever workaround. They're like, what if we don't do that, and we just do the merger? Then it can't be reviewed. In this document, they quote from several executives who were saying, less is more. Let's make sure we are not submitting these books. So, is this wokeness run amok or based?
That one is I wouldn't call that necessarily based, but this is more of a personal thing. Is that I hate private equity firms like KKR, so I'm personally supportive.
So go rip them. Now this is the last one is where it gets interesting, and I think we can and we can actually start talking about some philosophy here. So they also whack her for MECI. So quote, this is Breitbart. MECI repeatedly invoked W.E.B. Du Bois, a black Marxist thinker, to further her argument that antitrust laws must be used against what she considers racism. This one was, to me, the most egregious because it is actually backwards. It is a reverse, incorrect reading of the speech that they reference. So you can put up E8, and for the fun of it, let me do this whole 3-paragraph section of it. So this is from the speech that they said is woke. So the economic opportunities and liberties protected by the Sherman Act, this is what she said in her speech, in particular, protections against monopolies were important to the founders too. Jefferson listed a restriction against monopolies among the rights that deserve to be enumerated in the Bill of Rights. After all, England's grant of monopolies for different products, including tea, may well have set the American Revolution in motion. The foundations on which the Sherman Act rests are not limited solely to concern about contractual restraints, property rights, and industrial relations. They also contemplate individual liberty and concern about distribution of power. Why is this concern for economic opportunity and liberty so important? I come back to my thesis because efforts to secure social and political rights are at risk if they are not backstopped by economic opportunity, and because antitrust plays an important role in our economic liberty and democracy of opportunity tradition. In his 1935 book, Black Reconstruction in America, Du Bois famously argued that a key reason why the Confederacy collapsed and the institution of slavery with it was because when Union soldiers arrived in the South, black Americans, as Du Bois put it, left the plantations and led a general strike. They exercised the most basic economic right that comes with freedom, the freedom to make decisions about one's labor. The exercise of this economic liberty devastated the Southern economy and, as he put it, furnished 200,000 federal soldiers. This is no doubt resonant for all of us in the room who have helped advance labor competition jurisprudence and protected the ability of organized workers to act collectively. So you respond to that while I find her
whether that's
quote.
woke or it's based.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like I said, it could be based, could be woke. I guess I don't really know. Unfortunately, I have not.
Here's the quote where she finishes. She says, on this telling, we should think harder about calls to subordinate our antitrust and anti-monopoly laws purportedly in service of some other social and political values. So she's saying, do not subordinate antitrust to a push for civil rights or to for a woke agenda. She's specifically, explicitly saying, do not do that. She's saying that economic rights are fundamental. If you don't have economic liberty, if you don't have economic resources in your community, you don't have the ability to fight for political and civil rights. It is the reverse of wokeism to say, no, it is essential. American liberty is essential. To have that speech be evidence of her wokeness was like, what's going on here?
Ryan, you probably taught 10 times harder about this article than the person who wrote it.
That's probably,
in terms of
because he took stuff that was handed to him as my guess and just slapped it together.
If anything, look, this is a very good view into exactly how. Look, everything is about framing, right? So what did they say? It was like some black Marxist. Is the way that they phrased it. I unfortunately don't know enough about. I need to go find a good book about.
You would like Du Bois.
No. I've read about him, but I have never read a book specifically about him. And it gets to the heart of where all the tension is with MAGA and with Bannonism, with the coherent ideology around this. But I think really what it comes down to is the current vector is all about control within the right. And to the extent that anything is considered like horseshoe or whatever, the right is the one that has to be in control. And I'm speaking in terms of the way that they see this movement. So for them, anybody who is willing to work with the Biden apparatchiks or any of these people, these are bad, right? These are enemies. And if we're going to have anybody who even agrees with that, it has to be somebody who already aligns with us on the cultural issues. So I do think it's unfortunate because, you have people like Chopra and others who really did try to transcend, I guess, partisan boundaries. But what can we say? The number one lesson here is that good faith does not get rewarded in Washington.
No, it doesn't.
That's really the way my number one lesson from any of those people, and I hate to say it because it almost makes me sound like blue MAGA, is, oh, you're an idiot for ever trying to work with those people. They're like, at the end of the day, it's about us. We're a team, and we fight within the team. I don't think it should work that way, but that's where the political incentives are right now.
And it also notice, as the last point, notice the interesting trap it sets up, because anybody who's watching this by the end is like, wait a minute. So all of the things that they claimed made her woke actually are not woke at all. What they're left with is she's black.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute. The one quote that the right loves from Martin Luther King is like, let's judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Did not happen with Doha here. But the second that I say that, they're like, aha.
That's woke.
You're woke. See?
Yes.
And we were right. We were right the whole time. So it's this like get out of doing like pretty blatant racism free card, because as soon as you criticize that, then you're being woke.
Now you see race everywhere, Ryan. You're the one who pointed it out, not them.
That's right. Yeah. Look, see, busted.
I don't even know if that's that. I really don't know if it's that deep. I really just think it was some stupid corporate oppo piece.
I think it was KKR.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And there's the KKR's attorneys are the same that have Eric Adams now, and we can get into that.
So good.
Some other time.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be. I actually am looking forward to that.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the Bro Show. I certainly did. Chris will be back tomorrow. We'll see you all then.